Ahoy, bonjour everybody to our webinar today about best practices, how you can secure your network with Kerio Control. I would like to welcome you to the webinar series. We had a break during the summer season, but colleagues of mine just had this high-level webinars about security threats, which is also part of the webinar today, and how you can accomplish all those tips they gave in their pretty in general webinar with Kerio Control. So first, I would like to start with the agenda for today. So again, we will, as we do it in every webinar, we give you a general overview over Kerio Control. So it's basically for people who are new to Kerio Control. Then we do a short review of the security threats webinar series. And then we just segue into the topic how you can secure your network with Kerio Control according to the topics my colleagues have mentioned during their security threats webinar. And of course, at the end, we have a questions and answers session. Today, as I mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague Anton Tikhonov, who will be helping me with answering the questions and answers which may arise during the presentation. And in case maybe I will get kicked out from Adobe Connect. So let's first start with a general overview of Kerio Control. So Kerio Control is a next generation firewall, router, and leading edge intrusion prevention system. Next generation firewall means it has capabilities which normal firewalls do not have, like application awareness and things like that. Also, it has a pretty advanced antivirus protection integrated. So whatever is going through your network in and out will be tested about viruses. We have a VPN server integrated into Kerio Control, which is free of charge. So there are no extra costs if you would like to set up a VPN connection or VPN server with Kerio Control. You have several options how you can use the integrated VPN. You can use our own developed Kerio VPN client and VPN server, but you can also use IPsec, which is necessary, for example, if you would like to connect to your Kerio Control with a mobile device. Also, you can have site-to-site tunnels, so it's a connection between two or more firewalls, and again, this is also not only possible between two Kerio Controls, you can also do it with a third party. Next thing is that we have an industry-leading integrated web content and application filtering option. I first mentioned it with the next generation firewall topic. So you can easily stop using applications by a single click in the application awareness. And of course, web content filtering, so your customers will not be able to serve or to visit malicious web pages, for example. All this is also necessary if you would like to have unmatched quality of service. You can do this with the integrated bandwidth management. So whenever you need to have some mission critical services always running and having a dedicated bandwidth, this can be easily done with Kerio Control, as you can preserve bandwidth or prioritize traffic with Kerio Control. The last thing which is interesting for most of the people is that you are pretty flexible in the deployment of Kerio Control. So you can buy a hardware box from us. We have currently 3 models, the NG100, the NG300 and the NG500. Or you can virtualize the Kerio Control as an Hyper-V or ESXi. Or you can download the ISO image, create your own hardware box, and after installation and using the ISO image, this hardware will be converted into a Kerio Control firewall. So let's start first with the Security Threats webinar series review. This series has 3 parts, and the first part of this series was, are all your IT devices protected? So first and common targets are modems and routers. Why? Because you have several times the case that people have not changed the default password, or they have some remote management option open, which is accessible from the internet. So to avoid this, my colleagues gave you the tips that you should definitely change the default password of a modem or router. You should disable the remote management for such a router, and if possible, just convert or restrict the router into the bridge mode, so it is only working as a modem, and all the logic and login will be done by a firewall, which is behind this modem. Another topic is IoT devices, which means Internet of Things devices. You see here an example is, for example, an IP camera or a thermostat from the company Nest. Is shown here. Those are devices which are usually and normally reachable from the outside world, but they are located in your local network. So how can you protect your local network from the maybe breach of such an IoT device? You should think about segmenting your network and isolate those IoT devices. And you should also think about restricting the access to and from this Internet of Things segment. Third, and this is basically a little bit like a Dr. House statement, don't trust your guests. You never know who is surfing or using your internet connection. Is this guest, can you trust your guests? So don't trust your guests, create a separate wireless network for your guests, and also block the access to other things of your internal networks. Part 2 of the Security Threat series was, is your network a source of spam or DDoS attacks? So distributed denial of service attacks. Basically, hackers are motivated always by financial gain. So they would like to get money from you, otherwise they will spam you with a denial of service attack. How do they do it? They prey on vulnerable software using known exploits. So there were several news over the last year where, for example, some PHP implementation had some vulnerabilities, and people can use those vulnerabilities to get into this PHP system, and maybe they get further to your local network. Also, my colleagues gave you again some best practices how to avoid it. First, always keep your systems up to date. So whenever some security issue comes up, normally companies react and will give you within a short time some update. So your system will be again protected and up to date. For example, when the Heartbleed vulnerability of the Heartbleed SSL vulnerability was detected, Kerio reacted within, I believe it was 24 or latest 48 hours with an update. So your Kerio Control and your Kerio systems were protected again. Again, segment segmentation is a good practice you can do here. So isolate your web servers and your hosted servers from the rest of the intranet. You should also think about deploying an intrusion prevention system which takes care of such attacks and can maybe react on such attacks. And you should always monitor your network for unusual behavior. So whenever there is something going on which is not the normal usage of, you should see this and you should monitor this and react on it. The last part of the series was about reducing the risk of ransomware in your network. So what are the common methods for infection? Pirated software, which has an integrated malware. For example, there is I just read the news today that the Transmission, which is a BitTorrent client for OS X, has some malware now integrated. So, for example, this is not directly a pirated software, but as you can see, maybe also, let's say, not so serious software can have such malware inside. And of course, if you download pirated software from different virus pages, for example, you will never be sure if there is maybe some code injected into this software which will be harmful for your intranet. Also, browser plugins can be the source of getting ransomware into via your web browser on your machine and then to your local network. This is, for example, also the reason why I believe Google Chrome and Apple are more and more restricting the usage of Flash in their browsers. Also, fake updates can be an issue, and malvertising, so the malware itself is embedded in some ads you see on a web page. Usually this should not happen on, let's say, serious pages, but when you are maybe surfing to pages which are, let's say, not so serious, it could be that the malware is within the ads. So how can you react on that? Again, on a high level, you should think about intrusion prevention with an IP blacklist. So there are services who are maintaining lists of IPs which are known to distribute some ransomware. You should have a up-to-date and valid antivirus running, and you can set up some web content filters to protect yourself from such ransomware. So the question today is how you can do this with Kerio Control. So now we are going to take the best practices tips from our colleagues. They gave on a pretty high level, now down to the Kerio Control. And let's first start that you are going to segment your network. So a normal network design, which you basically know, is a pretty flat network design, but this is pretty insecure. As the people have already mentioned, that the flat network means that that the whole machines are on a single flat design, which means all devices are in the same subnet and no firewall protection between the local devices. So let's say, to give a concrete example, all the devices in your network are on the subnet 192.168.1.xx. How can you better protect your local network? Try to do a segmented network design, which is even more secure. So distinct subnet for each network. So put your printers and workstations on their own subnet. put servers on their own subnet, put your IoT devices on a separate network, and also put guests on a separate network. This will definitely quarantine insecure devices, like, for example, the IoT devices. And of course, it forces the traffic between the local networks going through your firewall. To see it as a concrete example with an Kerio Control, this is the interface configuration you can see, and you see that we have here several network interfaces created. One is for the printers and workstations. One DMZ is for the servers. We have one dedicated interface for the IoT devices or Internet of Things devices, and we have a separate one for guests. This is pretty easy and pretty easy to accomplish if you have physical Ethernet interfaces, physical network cards, because you can then dedicate a network interface directly to one of those subnets. This can also be done if you do not have enough Ethernet interfaces in your Kerio Control installation. You can do this also via VLANs, virtual LANs. The only thing is that when you're trying to achieve this with VLANs, things may get complicated, as you also need a switch in your network which is capable of detecting the VLAN packets. So you need a VLAN capable switch. So the easiest approach is to have real existing Ethernet ports, real existing network interfaces, and you dedicate the interface to the wished segment. And as you can see here, the LAN, the guest, the DMZ and IoT LAN, they have separate subnets. So it starts with 10.10.10 and we go up with 10.10.20, 10.10.30 and 10.10.40. When it comes to the guest access, this, as you can see, we have a guest interface. This can easily be created with the Kerio Control, and you should enforce a separate segment by using the built-in guest interfaces. Additionally, you should assign a password to this interface, so people again need to know the password before they can use the guest interface. The guest interface can be, for example, an extra attached wireless access point if you would like to provide wireless access to or a hotspot for your guests, but at the interface can also be connected by Ethernet. To have the communication working smoothly, when you have your network segmented, some additional traffic routes configuration is necessary. So the first rule is that you permit access from local networks to the internet. That makes sense, as you would like to have people accessing the internet. Second rule would be that permits access to the firewall for the DHCP and DNS and authentication services. Otherwise, for example, the authentication will not work. Third one will be that it permits the firewall to establish an outbound connection, so to the outside world. And the fourth one is permits access to reverse proxy for connecting to IoT devices and DMZ servers, so you can put, for example, the DMZ and the IoT devices behind the reverse proxy. And the last one is the cleanup rule, which drops everything else. So whatever is not matching one of those rules will be dropped, and of course this protects again your network. My colleagues were also talking about that you should keep your systems up to date, and I will now show you how you can keep your Kerio Control and the different functions up to date. So first, we have introduced with one of our last updates the automatic update option, which can be found in the advanced option settings under software updates. There you can simply tick the box that you would like to download and upgrade to a new version automatically. Per default, this will be done always. So within a given time, it will immediately update the Kerio Control system. If you would like to have this maybe at a time which is more suitable for you, for example in the night, you can of course create a separate time range and assign it to this functionality. So updates like in this example will be done during the night between 2 and 3 a.m. Next thing is that you should activate, and it is usually configured automatically and activated automatically when you deploy a Kerio Control, that the IPS and antivirus databases should automatically be updated. In our example here, we have lowered the interval to 1 hour. So if you are maybe a little paranoid like I am sometimes, and you would like to have the latest updates in a pretty short time, you can lower the interval to 1 hour. The default interval, I believe, is between 6 or 8 hours. If the update is done from the intrusion prevention or the antivirus, you will not recognize this, as the traffic will not be disturbed during the update. If the whole Kerio Control is updating, of course, you will have a short interruption of the traffic. Next thing, and this was also mentioned by my colleagues, you should monitor the network for unusual behavior. So how can Kerio Control help you on that? So first, you should every now and then, from time to time, you should have a look into the logs. These two logs are the, I would say, most interesting ones. It's the security log and the filter log, and you can easily see what kind of intrusions and alerts have been recognized by the Kerio Control and how Kerio Control reacted on that. You can also set your own. If you do not want to have always a look into the logs, you can set up your own alerts, so you get alerted by email, and you can find this in the accounting and monitoring section of Kerio Control, and you can easily add a person or a group to whom this alert should be sent. A good idea is, for example, if the host connection limit is reached, or if there is some peer-to-peer network client detected, or if a virus is detected. Additionally, you can have a review of the real-time network activity to observe users' activities to confirm legitimate behavior. So you can see it under active hosts, who's connected, and under active connections, you can see the connections to the services. Again, here you can see, for example, some interesting things, like there is, for example, a download running from the stream theworld.com, and you may not want that people are downloading complete streams, and I believe the stream theworld.com is some sort of page where you can download movies which are not officially now at that moment available on DVD. Also, you can have an historical review of the network activity, and this is done with the Kerio statistics and reporting. And you can even trim it down to a specific person or a specific user, and you can see what pages and what kind of traffic this user has caused, and maybe react on the behavior you have seen. So you can create additional rules, which in this example is forbidding Brian Carmichael to serve some pages with video content. Next thing is block disruptive or intrusive activity. So one of the cool features of Kerio Control is the intrusion detection and prevention. So this is enabled by default. So again, just check if it is activated on your Kerio Control. The intrusion detection and prevention system in Kerio Control filters harmful types of traffic, and it of course reports suspicious activity to the security log. So we saw some excerpt from the security log 2 slides ago. These entries are reported by the intrusion detection and prevention system. And again, it is enabled per default. Next thing is the peer-to-peer detection. This is a content filter rule you find under content filter. So it is already created for you, but it is not activated by default. It is disabled by default. This could be the reason that you may need some peer-to-peer traffic, as for example, some Linux distributions are distributed by BitTorrent links. So when you have this content filter activated, you won't be able to download, for example, a big Linux distribution. But I would say in 99% of the cases, there is no need to allow the peer-to-peer traffic. So it is as simple as you can think of. Just tick the box, because this rule is a default rule, but only not activated. Just tick the box and it is activated. Denial of service prevention, or DOS. We call it connection limits, but it means basically the same. So you can limit the total connections from a single host. So if there is maybe somebody trying from a single host to flood your network or your internet access, you can set a limit, and you can also set a limit of maximum connections to a specific host in your local network. This is also activated by default, and the values you see here are the most balanced one, but of course you can set your own values. Now we come to the topic how to block malware and malicious content. So this can be done by the content rules. So again, we have a collection of filters you can activate or create your own one. There is a default one, the Kerio web filter rule, which blocks malicious websites, like websites which are known for hacking or malware distribution or botnet, and this is also enabled by default. But of course, you can set additional content rules if you have some specific things you would like to block. Also, in the content filter, there is with the update of one of the last versions, the application awareness. So you can also block things like Facebook or Skype. So if you are seeing that maybe some malicious content is coming from Facebook pages, just block Facebook and you are safe. Also, the antivirus is also enabled by default, and it blocks malicious files, downloads, and attachments. Again, this is enabled by default, so just cross-check if it is really activated. Otherwise, please activate it. Let's now come to the point that you restrict your network a little bit more and make it more safe. So you say you require a network login. So you can activate this under the domains and user login on the authentication options, that it is always required for users to authenticate if they would like to access some web pages. This has two advantages. One, the first advantage is that let's say nobody who is allowed or known by you can use your internet connection because he needs to authenticate. And second advantage is, if people are authenticated, you can easily see and find out if maybe somebody is abusing the internet connection or your network connection. Next thing is, and you may know it from Kerio Connect, this is named the anti-hammering. We call it here the block IP addresses suspicious for password guessing attacks. So this should also be activated in the domains and user login security options tab. So whenever people, there is somebody trying to break into your system and he's doing a brute force attack with passwords, he will be blocked for a specific time, so he may stop this attempt. Last but not least, as I said, there is that my colleagues showed you that you should disable the remote access and remote management. One good option is the Kerio, which is a service from Kerio, free of charge, where you can add your Kerio Control deployments to this service. So you do not need to open any administration ports on your Kerio Control itself, because once the Kerio Control appliance is known and added to Kerio, and you would like to connect to your Kerio Control via Kerio, the Kerio Control is initiating the connection to Kerio, and it will be closed immediately after you left the administration interface again. So there is no need to open extra ports for the remote administration. You even can delete the rule or untick the rule which is allowing remote administration. Next thing is that you should host your web services behind the reverse proxy. This has two advantages. Number one is that you preserve the IPv4 addresses, so you just need a single IPv4 address, and the reverse proxy is delegating and routing the requests to the correct service. And as a nice additional advantage, you should then see that you get an A rating from the SSL labs, as Kerio Control is always up to date, as you have configured the automatic updates. You can be sure that all the SSL libraries are up to date in Kerio Control. Maybe you have some web services running which are not that up to date, or maybe you cannot update them because then something else is not working anymore. So you would definitely get a bad rating from the SSL labs. If you put it behind the reverse proxy of Kerio Control, you will definitely get a better rating, because you can be sure that the SSL libraries in Kerio Control are always up to date. If you need an access from the outside world, a direct access to your network, you should tunnel remote services through a VPN connection. So for example, like RDP, VNC, whatever, there is no need to open specific ports for such vulnerable services. Just set up the Kerio VPN or the IPsec server in Kerio Control and let people do a VPN connection to your Kerio Control and then run the RDP session or the VNC session. So that's basically all for today, or for this webinar. I've seen that Anton is pretty much answering all the questions we have here at the moment. So please continue with your questions, as I would like to give a short summary again. So first topic is segment your network, keep your systems up to date, monitor the network for unusual behavior, block disruptive and intrusive activity, block malware and malicious content, require network login, and configure a secure remote access. If you would like to have this presentation maybe as a reference, when you are controlling your Kerio Control or when you are setting up a new Kerio Control, you will get a follow-up email after this webinar with a link to the recording and, of course, to this presentation. At the end of the presentation, you will also find a list of resources we have created for you, also segmented into the separate topics like segmenting your network, keep systems up to date, monitoring the network for unusual behavior, block disruptive and intrusive activity, block malware and malicious content, and require network login, and of course configure secure remote access. Those are articles in our knowledge base which give you additional information, how to configure it and what kind of things you need to pay attention. So Anton, I would say we are pretty much done with the presentation, and I think you've done an awesome job in answering those questions. And
yeah, Carson, if you can help with it.
Sure, go ahead.
No, I mean, if you can help me with answering questions, because I have only 10 fingers on my hand, so.
Okay. Derek is asking what's the best way to block HTTPS, for example, block facebook.com with the application awareness, which is integrated now in Kerio Control. You just search for Facebook, tick a box, and then this will be blocked. There's a question from James Lepper. So you do not provide a specific set of software installs to create a VPN connection from a remote node. I do not clearly understand what you mean. We have our own Kerio VPN client for Linux, Windows, and Mac, which you can download free of charge if you would like to use the Kerio VPN. If you would like some other VPN connection like IPsec or something like that, this is basically normally integrated into operating system. There's a question from Arjoy, Kerio Control hardware box, can we plug USB modem for getting any internet? No, the USB ports are not used for any modems, and it is also not supported and used for adding additional Ethernet interfaces with an USB to Ethernet adapter.